We do have Elias Amare of Horn of Africa TV back with us. Elias, thanks for joining us. Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, no. Oh, there we
hear
can.
you. Now we can. Now we can.
Success.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Perfect.
Thanks for inviting me again, Rania.
No, of
Eugene.
course.
Sorry about the glitch.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Great to have you here. Well, in a way, I wish it was under better circumstances, but nonetheless, this week we've seen this release of this new, alleged UN human rights report, although it's sponsored by the UN, but it has its own provenance. But nonetheless, going back to what we've been hearing for the past 3 years about the recent war in northern Ethiopia, waged by the TPLF against the Ethiopian government and against the Eritrean government, and also against many Ethiopian people and surrounding regions around Tigray. This sort of rehashing the same thing, that there are a lot of human rights abuses by the Ethiopian government, by the Eritrean government. But one of the things I noted, and where I really wanted to start here, is it actually says in the Al Jazeera article about this, when they were interviewing one of the people behind it, they were like, but really, is whatever we can say about Ethiopia, the Eritreans, they were the worst. Eritrea is the worst of the worst. And I just thought to myself, this is sort of amazing in a way, that a country is invited by their neighboring country to come help them with a security issue, totally legally from the point of view of international law. And they have somehow, that country, Eritrea, become the centerpiece of all negative discussion about what took place there, while the entity that started the war, the TPLF, is barely talked about. So the first question I just had to ask you is, why is it that Eritrea, this small country, is being the most demonized in the context of everything that's being alleged here about this conflict?
Well, Eugene, it's par for the course for Eritrea. It has been this demonization, relentless smear campaign, psychological warfare, negative propaganda has been there for the past, say, 25 years. But in particular, in this latest war, that the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front itself, ignited on November 3, 2020. That's beyond a shadow of doubt. They themselves have admitted it. But as you said, the TPLF gets away scot-free. It should be on the docks facing war crimes charges. But it's all demonizing Eritrea. And it seems to me now, after 3 years, 2 years of the war, and then the Pretoria Agreement last year, 2022, cessation of hostilities, the TPLF is still at large. It has not been completely disarmed. It is right now in Tigray. Tigray is a hellhole under the TPLF. Breakdown of law and order, lawlessness, looting, plundering, rape, all kinds of horrendous things. But those are never brought to the fore. The crimes that the TPLF committed, the child soldiers, the crimes in the Amhara region, the crimes in the Afar region when it launched the war, the atrocities it committed in Maikadra and what have you. The list is so long that one would think that they would at least, the Western propaganda media would at least cover 10% of it. But no, it's shifting the blame, scapegoating Eritrea. So the ultimate target, it seems to me, even when the TPLF launched the war, was, Eritrea. Of course, on the way, they would also do regime change and return to power in Addis Ababa to overthrow the federal government led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali. But the charges have been there, fabricated, concocted. The Aksum massacre, while the war was going on in 2020, 2021, it was proven to be utterly false. Those charges were bogus. Amnesty International, the Human Rights Watch, they were caught red-handed fabricating lies. But yet, they double down and do more lies, more fabrications of these atrocities. It is reminiscent of what Amnesty International did in 2011 when the war against Libya was being prepared. You fabricate human rights atrocities, Gaddafi and the Libyan regime is committing atrocities, bringing black soldiers, committing rape, Viagra stories, all kinds of horrendous stories that later were proven to be false. And Amnesty International itself did a mea culpa after the fact. But by that time, Libya was destroyed and Gaddafi was assassinated. So it seems to me this is like a preparation for an R2P type responsibility to protect humanitarian intervention type of relentless war propaganda on Eritrea. So I say this is part of the course for Eritrea.
And I think a part of, and this is actually like common, right, among any country that's targeted by U.S. imperialism, is of course let's call them the U.S. regime media. The U.S. capitalist press is very much aligned with the State Department and will just repeat whatever the State Department says. And part of the sort of like one of the weapons in that very large toolbox of sort of information warfare against a country like Eritrea, as well as many other countries targeted by the U.S. this way, is using the diaspora that doesn't agree with the government that, or is on the side of the U.S. to kind of like push that narrative as well, which you see quite often with Eritrea. You'll see that, regardless of the fact that much of the Eritrean diaspora is actually quite supportive of their country, those who are in the opposition and outside of the country often get, the microphone, get the airtime, get quoted. But I think one thing that's interesting is there's been a kind of uptick, it seems, in violence from this group of people. I know in the past few months, Eritrea has been celebrating the anniversary of its independence, and there's been these cultural festivals in various cities around the world. And there was recently one in Germany where there was a massive, violent attack by Eritrean opposition against those who support Eritrea. Something similar happened in Sweden a few months ago. And I think in Toronto, there was an Eritrean cultural festival that was actually canceled because opposition was, making threats. And I mean, this is like actual violence we're talking about. So I guess I'm just curious if you could talk a bit about the influence of sort of the Eritrean opposition activists in the diaspora in the sort of information warfare against Eritrea.
Well, Rania, this I see it as a last desperate attempt they've tried regime change in Eritrea for over 2 decades. They've imposed their baby killer sanctions. I prefer to call them baby killer sanctions because the sanctions kill babies. They've tried isolation, encirclement. They've tried proxy wars through their client puppet regime in the region, the TPLF, against Eritrea. Everything that was tried to bring about the regime change, overthrow, failed miserably. So this I see as a last desperate attempt to, bring about hooligans, recruits of the ethno-fascist TPLF in the diaspora who came as Eritreans, and they claim to be Eritreans, but they're not Eritreans, because we know from records that 60% of those that came as refugees claiming to be Eritreans, because European countries, the United States, were granting blanket political asylum to anybody who claims to be from Eritrea, part of the attempt to depopulate Eritrea, to drain it of its vital youth force. Over the past years, thousands have been coming claiming to be Eritreans from the Tigray region in particular, but from elsewhere in the Horn of Africa. So what you saw, these attacks on Eritrean festivals that you witnessed recently, that you mentioned in Germany, UK, Sweden, even Israel, Canada, the United States, are last desperate attempts by these hooligans to create, to manufacture sort of schism within the Eritrean community, which is for the most part patriotic. It may be the mainstream. I mean, I'm talking about the majority, the bulk of the majority may not be overtly or actively political, but when it comes to their homeland, their country, they don't want anything bad to happen to Eritrea. They don't want sanctions against Eritrea. They don't want Eritrea to be relentlessly demonized. So they stand fiercely, despite political differences, with their people and their country. I mean, this is natural reaction. So these hooligans have been recruited to create a violence, and as you said, and then the mainstream regime media of the West cooperates in this and portrays it as if it's violence of Eritreans against Eritreans. Nothing could be further from the truth. The majority of these are from the Tigray region, the recruits of the TPLF, supporters of the TPLF, but they're masquerading as Eritreans. True, there may be a sprinkling of a few Eritreans with them, but about 90% of them are TPLF, followers. And so this is a continuation of the TPLF war that failed miserably the past 2 years in Ethiopia, against Ethiopia and Eritrea. The TPLF was defeated. It was forced to sign the Pretoria cessation of hostilities. So the violence is being exported, so to speak, to the West. And the target here is the Eritrean people, their culture, their identity. And the reaction we're seeing is that Eritreans are unified. On the contrary, when such attacks come, it unifies us. The secondary contradictions, the minor political differences are put aside, and we stand aside. We are like that. I mean, decades of struggle against all odds. These cultural festivals, by the way, have been going on in Europe and the United States, in the West, for the past 5 decades. No violences have been witnessed before. So this is a new phenomenon, but it's the last desperate attempt, I would say, of failing empire. The unipolar hegemony is declining. This is the global. If you look at the global situation, the crisis of the unipolar hegemon, we're seeing the war on two fronts against Russia, against China has failed. The global South is awakening. We've seen the BRICS emerging strongly. Europe is in decline. Its economy, the war the proxy war that they have unleashed on Ukraine has backfired. Winter is coming. This winter is going to be terrible. So, in a way, I also see that this may be a preparation for fascism on the rise in Europe, where the migrants, the black refugees, will be scapegoats. As in the 1930s, there were Jews to be scapegoats. Anti-Semitism was there. So who's going to be, when the economic crisis hits Europe, who's going to be the scapegoat? I see, you may call me conspiracy theorist, but that also may be at play. In any case, what we've witnessed here was that the law enforcement, the police, were in cahoots with the disruptors, with the violent thugs. They let them, they treated them with kid gloves. They let them get away scot-free with violence, with injuries. Even in some countries like Germany, the police themselves were stopped. Who gets away with such kind of hooliganism, with such kind of lawlessness and violence? Where in the West can black men get away with violence
really
against
point.
police?
Yeah.
We're living here in the United States. We know what happens to any black man who steps out of line.
Right.
The police don't even need excuses to shoot at black people, to choke black people. We know what happened to George Floyd. That's recent memory. So this, I think, is an orchestrated, well-coordinated global attack against the Eritrean diaspora community, which for the most part is patriotic and is standing by its country. It is part of the war against Eritrea. I can conclude.
Well, Elias, as always, really appreciate you helping us sort through all of these issues. You're a contributing editor at Horn of Africa TV. And as always, thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Rania and Eugene, thanks as always. I'm becoming a frequent guest, and I like that.
So do we.